Welcome to the Women Writing Podcast. I'm your book coach, Liisa Kovala. I'm an author, accelerator, certified fiction and memoir book coach, and the author of Sisters Winter War, Surviving Stutthof, and the upcoming Like Water for Weary Souls. And as a Finnish Canadian, I love my coffee. Take a coffee break with us as we chat about all things writerly with authors and publishing industry professionals. In today's episode of Women Writing, I'm having a coffee break with Shelly Sanders. Shelley is a Canadian author, essayist, and former journalist based in Toronto. She has written 5 novels, including most recently The Night Sparrow and Daughters of the Occupation. Shelley's next novel will be published by HarperCollins in 2027. She is also the author of 3 acclaimed young adult historical novels, Rachel's Secret, Rachel's Promise, and Rachel's Hope. Shelley began her writing career as a freelance journalist for Canadian national publications. In November, Shelley will be in a writer's residency in Ventspils, Latvia, and she will be working on a nonfiction manuscript rooted in silence about the intersection of intergenerational trauma and estrangement. Hi, Shelley. How are you?
I am great, Lisa. How are you doing?
I'm so good, and I'm so pleased to have you on the podcast this morning. What are you taking a coffee break from?
So I have just been working on finishing the manuscript. I have been commissioned to write another book for HarperCollins that's due in January. And so I've just been finishing a draft of that because I'm off to a writing residency in Europe on Saturday.
Oh, yeah, I want to talk about that after,
Yeah.
for sure. So I'm so fascinated by that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So I always like to ask this question because I'm so curious about when people come to writing. Were you always a writer as a kid, as a young adult, or is it something that you fell in love with later in life?
Well, I was always a reader, and historical fiction was what I was really drawn to because I loved learning the social history of characters and that. It just stuck with me. And then I loved to write and did a degree in English literature, but I was so intimidated by the talent of, Margaret Atwood, Alice Munro, all of these writers. I went into journalism because I just didn't feel good enough. And it took me a really long time, and it took the end of when the internet came in, and, I lost all my freelance and all of that. And then I, had all this information about our family and that. And then I decided, okay, I'm going to turn to fiction. And so I actually took the entire creative writing program at University of Toronto because it was hard to go from the rigidity of word counts in newspapers and even magazines, which were, 2,500 words, to creative writing. So it was a real process for me in terms of changing the way I wrote.
Feel like we have similarities there because I remember having to make a decision between going to journalism at Carleton and
Right.
English degree at Ottawa U. That was like I chose in Ottawa, but I just was it going to be English or was it going to be journalism? And I went into English, but then I did the route that many English majors do, which is, oh, I guess I'll be a teacher.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. No, very true. Yeah.
Yeah. One of those. There's kind of a couple of paths that seem to open, although I think there really are way more paths. I just wasn't being very creative about what else I could do. But
that's right,
to me, it makes so much sense if you love reading, you love writing, journalism is kind of a natural fit. And
absolutely.
That's what my daughter did, and she's an avid reader and writer as well. But she's a journalist now.
Wonderful.
So that's really fascinating. Yeah, and I think a lot of folks start out as readers, just absorb those stories and just falling in love with them.
Exactly.
But I love what you said about just when you're in that English program and you're reading these masters, how intimidating that can be, not really thinking about, but they started somewhere too.
No, and I really lacked self-confidence. I mean, I did okay, but I had to work through like I always had a job, usually we're waiting tables and stuff. And so my grades weren't as high as they could have been probably. And I just really lacked self-confidence. And so I just completely did not think I had it in me. And it took me a long time to get there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really a typical story that you just don't realize how much work it takes, and that it's not that you need to be this brilliant writer right from the beginning. Like you work at it and you learn. And I feel like that exactly the same way, that it was a slow slower burn. And then it's like, oh, I can actually learn this.
Yeah.
I did the UT program too, which is an excellent program for people who haven't heard of it.
Yeah.
Such a great program. So many amazing mentors, writers there.
Absolutely. And I love being able to choose different courses and things like that. It's a really wonderful program. I
Yeah,
recommend it all the time. Yeah.
amazing. So
Yeah.
then did you first start writing young adults? Is that what
Yes.
you
Yes.
okay.
So I did. So my first three books came out with a smaller Toronto Press second story, which also publishes in the US, so that was good. And they were inspired by my grandmother's escape from a pogrom in Russia. I didn't know a lot about my grandmother or my family's history at all because no one ever spoke about it. Didn't even know I was Jewish till I was 18. Didn't know, anything about what it was to grow up in Russia. And so I decided that I really wanted to, and she died when I was 13. And I thought, you know what, I want to learn about her. As a journalist, I knew that by digging in, I could understand what it was like from doing research. And so I ended up, researching what it would be like to be a young girl in Russia under the last Tsar. It would be horrible. He was extremely anti-Semitic. There were multiple pogroms. And so I wrote not on the pogrom she escaped because it was like mid 1900s, but I wrote about the 1903 Kishinev pogrom, which was very significant pogrom, the first significant one of the 20th century. And I also really liked, well, I didn't like, but I mean, I was inspired by the fact that the way it started was the newspaper editor and publisher was hugely anti-Semitic, and there was a Christian boy killed, and he blamed it on the Jews. And he wrote fake news, fake headlines for months and igniting hatred against the Jews, which basically flared during a 3-day pogrom over Easter and Passover and decimated the entire Jewish community. And as a journalist, the idea of someone in that kind of power with that kind of privilege using it in that way was horrifying. And so I really wanted to bring a light to that what happened, that whole thing with that pogrom. And so that was the first book, Rachel's Secret. And then the trilogy, it became a trilogy because they sold quite well. And so I got a contract for the next two. And they follow my grandmother's trajectory from Russia, fleeing a pogrom, to Shanghai, which is the second book, where Jews could live without papers. And then she worked when she finished her English, I mean, her high school, and by herself took a ship to California and got a business degree at UC Berkeley in 1929 while working as a live-in nanny in her fifth language. I know. Now, I knew none of this growing up, and it only found out as I was writing and talking to my aunt and my mother because they just, especially my mother, just do not give much information. They were raised in a house of secrets and don't be curious. So it was really an amazing experience to understand and to travel that journey with her in a way and understand what it might have been like. And I made some really cool discoveries along the way in my research as well, which the family didn't know about. So it was really, oh God, like so gratifying. It really was gratifying process.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
love the idea that that she went through all of that and
Yeah.
had those unbelievable experiences and then found her way here and didn't talk about it
No.
and didn't like so your is it your mother that her is her daughter so
Yeah.
and your mother did she have any inkling at all or was it just that she kind of knew snippets and then did
She
not.
knew snippets, but my mother from the get-go, I believe, and she'll admit it too, was basically told not to ask questions. And my
Right,
aunt, who's 6 years younger, said, yeah, she would shut us down. If they tried
right,
to ask her anything about her life before
yeah.
Canada, she would shut them down. She was very depressed, my grandmother. She would sit in her housecoat playing solitaire when my mom left for school, and she was still sitting in her housecoat playing solitaire when my mother got home. Because I have now learned in my research for the book I'm actually doing my writing residency on that, holding secrets and hiding your authentic self is really toxic. It's toxic to you, it's toxic to your family. It has so many negative effects. And I have felt, two generations from my grandmother. Like I'm, the granddaughter, and I'm her namesake actually, but I have felt that, the toxicity of the secret. So yeah, it was, that, I think that was very common back then, but we now know how awful it is and not a good thing to do to hide who you are and what you've been through.
This is really resonating for me because of like my first book was about my dad's experiences as a
Mm.
Finnish sailor in like he was a merchant marine and was captured by the Nazis. The 90 Finnish sailors ended up in a concentration camp at
Oh,
16. And and if you met him, he was happy and
mm.
like loved people and was very social. And he always had a story to tell and jokes, and he was always smiling and helping people. And he had this really lovely, warm um, way of being in the world. But
Yeah.
at home, in the quiet, there
Hmm.
was a lot of like sitting in dark rooms and
Hmm.
um, contemplating and looking at old photos. And there was a whole other side, and there was insomnia, and there was night terrors. So there was almost like two sides, like the public side and the part that is very social, and the part that was um, more dealing with the trauma that I didn't understand, of course, as a kid.
No, yeah, we
And
don't.
you don't ask because you don't want to, you don't like, I didn't know, I didn't ask till I was an adult and when he was kind of ready to talk about it. But as a kid, you kind of understood that something had happened, but you didn't really know. And yeah, so that's really resonates for me that she would be just in her own shell.
In her own
And,
child.
and your
And
mom would be like, no, don't need to ask her because you don't want to push any buttons and make them feel worse or
no, no, I think she made it feel, and my mom actually described her more recently because I push at my mother
yeah,
exactly how you just described your father. She said like she would go out dancing with my grandfather and really enjoyed that outside the apartment, but then inside, was like you say, a different person. I mean, we have to understand the context too. Montreal, my mother was born in 38, so the cusp of World War II when we turned back the St. Louis, which was filled with Jews, and my grandmother saw this. And so and there were signs, no blacks, no Jews, no dogs, Jews were not welcome. And so she had a lot of negativity and knew being Jewish was, in her mind, not great. And so, yeah, so she had this public persona and then inside, yeah.
yeah, interesting.
Hmm.
And so you said you didn't learn that you were Jewish until you were 18. So when she came to Montreal, when she came to Canada, was that an identity that she just
Hid.
disassociated from?
It is because she met my grandfather in Shanghai. He was Canadian and he was there for 5 years working and he did a number of different jobs. I think he stayed longer when he met my grandmother. And I think so. Like so he was in advertising and if they'd known like he has his big account, the McDonald tobacco was hugely anti-Semitic and so he would have lost his job if they'd known. And so they lived on this cusp of, having to be, having to hide who
Right.
she was. And Jews were not allowed in the curling club where they curled. And, so there was all of these things. And I think she had two daughters and didn't want them to become second-class citizens in her mind. And it wasn't good in Montreal. It was not
Yeah, so
good in
she is
Montreal.
really
Mhm.
protecting herself, her family, her children,
Yeah.
but in a way, like that would be so devastating to you as
Hmm.
a person to have to just squash everything about
Everything.
who you are.
Yeah.
So even though you're like, I understand the idea of trying to protect your
Hmm.
children and living in that environment, you're trying to um, be safe
Hmm.
and but it's just like it's mind blowing, right? To that anyone would have to
It,
step
yeah.
away from that and just bury it.
Exactly, but we're seeing that today with
Yeah,
Jews that like in France can't wear a Star of David or can't walk around with the kippah on their head. I mean, we're seeing that here even in Canada. So, I
yeah,
mean, yeah, it is horrible that she had to hide that and it had really negative effects because she hiding herself my mother and sister grew up in kind of like not really religious. They did go to a church like in town of Mount Royal where they lived but my grandmother never said a word and never stood, never bowed, like never kneeled, nothing. Like, it was clear that she was not part of this world and it was hard and they wouldn't have known why and there were all of these kinds of things and so and then so I grew up without any religion or any sort of sense of being part of something bigger than myself and there's just that so that's what happens and so we've lost the culture we've lost our identity And I just can't imagine, like, when I found out about Latvia only in 2016, that the family's actually from Latvia originally. She would have been in Montreal, and all of a sudden not hearing from all of her cousins and aunts and uncles. Her entire extended family was murdered. And she, never told. I mean, to hold that in herself, I can't even imagine. Like, and she would have known eventually, but it was Latvia was taken by the Soviets until 1991, and she died in 78. So, she wouldn't have known how they died, or what happened, their fate. And so I can't imagine how horrible that, because she was very close to a number of these cousins. I have photos of her from the time she was 4 till like 1929, when she'd finished her degree. So,
Yeah, I mean, what incredible strength she had
yeah.
to leave and to travel and to come here and to
Hmm.
make really difficult decisions that would probably be so antithetical to who she was.
Yes.
Like, what an amazing person. And I'm really curious about your mom then, because she would have not known a lot of these things
Yeah.
until later. And then you were like,
Yeah.
no, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Well, there's always someone. I listen to Danny Shapiro's podcast, Family Secrets, because it resonates with me, and she makes the point that there's always someone in the family at some point that has this curiosity and decides they're going to find out. And that was me. I think my aunt wanted to find out, but she was busy, and she, da da da, like things, and didn't have the internet. And I wanted to know. I would ask questions, and my mom didn't have the answers for them. And it was only when I found photos at my Aunt Nusha's. My Aunt Nusha was my grandmother's older sister, who lived like 20 years longer, and had all these photos in her apartment with my grandmother as a child. And I'm like, oh my God, I have to have these. She didn't want me to take them. She had glaucoma and was in her 80s, couldn't even see. So I snuck them in my clothes, literally down in my clothes, while my mother kept her busy with my 6-month-old daughter. And I walked out with all of these albums in my clothes. And, my mother was horrified. My mother is very prim and proper, and I come out like with all of these bulky things. And we left. But thank God, because she died like 6 months later, the photos disappeared. And those were the photos that led me to Latvia. And we had no idea. Like, my aunt and my mother, they never knew anything about Latvia, and all of their relatives were there. In fact, our roots go back there to the late 1700s in Latvia, and we did not know. We didn't know why my grandmother was born in Siberia. And she was born in Novosibirsk, which was Novo-Nikolaevsk at the time. And so one of my first questions on my first trips to Riga, Latvia, I went and met with the curator of the Jewish Museum, and I'd sent all this information about my great grandparents and all of that. And he told me immediately, okay, so your great grandfather was involved in a workers' revolution, an uprising in 1905, that was sympathetic to the Bloody Sunday in Leningrad, St. Petersburg, and he was exiled to Siberia. He had an arranged marriage with my great grandmother, and so she found herself, Sophie, in an arranged marriage and off to Siberia, which would have been hell. Like hell in 1905 as a Jewish, hell. The conditions would have been hell. I mean, that's what my grandmother was raised in. The Cossacks treated Jews horribly. The pogroms began in Siberia, unfortunately, the year they moved there, were exiled there. So, a horrible situation. And finally, we knew why. My grandmother was born there, and but they went back as political exiles, could go back once a year to visit, and they went in the summer. I have pictures of summer, like 3 generations, in the summer, and happy, and all of that, and so it was just a huge thing to absorb. Like, it was just massive. We just had no idea. And again, and my aunt especially was kind of angry that, she didn't know any of this. Like, it's really, our identity was unknown. So,
And your aunt and your mother, did they embrace your journey of exploration then? Because they must have
mhm.
realized, oh, these stories are incredible, and just not having understood them.
Yes, my
Or
aunt
did anyone
especially.
have resisted?
I know, yeah. Well, my aunt especially, she, like me, reclaimed her Judaism, married a Jewish guy, And like I belong to a synagogue in Oakville and I'm very involved and it's been like my second home, like a family, and it's been a very important part, something I'd been looking for since
Yeah.
I was a child, but
Yeah.
couldn't put into words. My mother has definitely embraced it as well, not as vocally. She's just kind of like I think in shock a little bit. And kind of, but very glad that I found all of this out. Like it's very meaningful for her. And so, yeah, she definitely has been really glad and they wish they could come to Latvia with me, but they're older and so I'm the person who goes and does all of that as a member of the family. But yeah, it's
And comes back with all the stories and the
yeah,
research and the photographs and
yeah,
shares it. And I just, yeah,
yeah.
I know. I know what that's like. And
Yeah,
it's just so incredible. And to think that had you not thought, oh, I need to know
yeah.
more about this, that
It's
that
true.
whole history would essentially be gone because
It
someone
would
would
have,
look into
because I don't think my kids would have cared. And
it.
it's interesting. I'm one of three siblings, and my brother and sister do not care. And I've in this book I'm doing a nonfiction for my writing residency. I've been interviewing people and um I interviewed this one person who does like intergenerational trauma and all of that. And I said, why am I, so interested? We're all the same parents and family, and it's just me, apparently, and they don't know why if there is a daughter, the oldest daughter is the person who gets it all. Yeah. They get all the shit. And I see that with my mother, who literally I think was immersed in my grandmother's depression, whereas my aunt is a completely different, upbeat, much more personality, 6 years younger. My mother absorbed it, and I absorbed it from my mother. And I'm the oldest daughter. My other two siblings, no, they don't know why, but they know that this is what's happening. The oldest daughter absorbs the trauma more so.
Not know about any of this because
Yeah.
I'm the youngest of four, but I'm the only
Mm.
girl.
Mm.
And the I'm not and all my siblings have all been interested in my dad's
Mhm.
story and what happened, and they wanted to know
Right.
and supportive,
Yeah.
but not particularly engaged.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I definitely hear what you're saying. I think like I absorbed the energy like in
Yeah.
whatever form it came, in that his positivity and his
Yeah.
way of looking at life and the things he wanted, but also the darkness and the
Yeah.
despair and the like that I absorbed all of it. Whereas I'm not sure
Yeah.
I don't want to speak for them because you don't really
Yeah.
know, but I kind of think they didn't make those connections.
Yeah. I
My
get that.
choice.
I think as women we are more emotional, but there's also the epigenetic, which so this was a rabbit hole I went down for Daughters of the Occupation, which I would say was my fourth book and my seminal book because it really kind of reflects my journey to my ancestral Jewish-Latvian roots. And so I discovered intergenerational trauma because I just came upon it when I was doing research and I read about it and thought, oh my God, that's my maternal side, like to a T. And what I found out, which was fascinating, is when a woman is pregnant with a daughter, at 5 months, the eggs of the granddaughter are present in her daughter. You have three generations at one time together for the next 4 months. And any trauma that the pregnant woman experiences is passed on and changes the way the DNA reacts for her daughter and her granddaughter. And so in my case, my grandmother was pregnant with my mother. My mother was born in July 38. So like the end of 37, 38, the cusp of World War II. She would have known things were getting bad in Riga for her cousins and aunts and uncles, and they were stuck there. And she had all of this, would have had this trauma while she was pregnant with my mother. And so, that is so powerful. And they know there's all kinds of studies. Rachel Yehuda is very big at Yale University doing this. They're doing it at Duke University. They're doing at major universities, they're doing these studies. And they know that this is a fact. This is a scientific thing, the epigenetic trauma to the DNA. And so I feel like I, like you, absorbed a lot of this and this trauma of my grandmother's and my mother's. And as well, I discovered my mother when we like I grew up in Chicago, though I was born in Toronto, and I would find my mother in the garage crying. And as a child, and just would shut the door. I just didn't even know how to deal with that.
Yeah.
But, I always had this sadness with me and, went on antidepressants years ago. It's something I just couldn't define, but it was this heaviness within me. And it's there. Like it's just there. And I just have to deal
Your
with it.
mom, and like,
Yeah.
did she recognize that in herself? Does she see that, or is it that was
No.
just who she was and didn't understand it, and just you just try to deal with it?
I think my mother, yeah, she wasn't as self-aware. And of course, we didn't talk about depression
Yeah,
back then as well. And it's still a stigma. I mean, it's still a
sure.
stigma. And no, that was who she was, and she was it was really sad, but I think, she has said she didn't feel loved growing up. My grandmother had no maternal ability at all. There was none in her. Like she didn't hug, didn't say I love you, was very guarded. And when, I knew her growing up, she's the only grandparent I knew. The others were all gone. Um, I knew she was different than my friend's grandmother. She wasn't huggy. There was like this off-guardness to
Yeah,
her, like,
yeah.
a wall, and there was an otherness, and it was just there, and there was a sadness in her eyes all the time. There was just this heaviness.
But now understanding what she went through, it must make so much sense to you to
Oh,
see how the behavior was and to be able to go, oh, I get that now. Like
absolutely. It
it's
is. This is why I say it's so important to talk about these traumas because 100%. My mother would, if my mother had known what she'd gone through, my mother would have had this empathy. Not
yeah,
that she didn't, but she would have known, okay, this is why my mother is just incapable of showing. My grandmother, I think, lost so much and went through so much that she put up a wall and was not going to let herself get hurt emotionally. And
yeah,
if you don't want to get hurt emotionally, you don't give of yourself.
yeah,
And so I think that's what happened. And so for sure, it has really helped me understand my grandmother and empathize with her. And it's made me want to talk more openly about talking, sharing how we feel and to get these stories out there.
yeah.
What has talked about, because I know we talk a lot about the Holocaust and all of that, but we don't talk about the pogroms.
Mm,
And as well, I did find out on my first trip to Latvia that I had 26 relatives, basically her extended family, all murdered in the Rumbula forest. And all of them are in photos with my grandmother at various ages. So I know that she knew them and had a relationship with them. And we don't talk about that. Like the Rumbula massacre is not talked about in any Holocaust museums. It's not talked about at all. So I really want to I'm trying to get this across, these untold stories, because their lives, I mean, in 2 nights, they killed almost 30,000 Jews, by bullets yeah. And so,
I mean, that's the power of stories,
mhm.
whether it's writing them now about things that have happened or even family members telling their stories, and I think a lot of folks after war and other events, they they know everyone around them is suffering. They know
Yeah.
everyone else has lost somebody. They know everybody else. So I wonder if it's just kind of like, okay, we just need to get on with life. We just need to move forward and bury all these things and try to move forward. And that's so terrible for everybody because nobody connects then. Nobody like you have that internal pain you're pushing down, but you're not open about it. And I think that like it's to me that's such a shame that a whole generations of folks who just like I hear it all the time. Oh, my grandparents had this story, or my parents had great grandparents, and I wish I'd asked them, but they didn't talk about it. They wouldn't talk about it, and so now that the children and the grandchildren are left with so many questions,
Yeah.
and those folks have didn't have an opportunity to kind of, not that you like, I don't really believe in telling a story and being like it can be healing, but it's not like you don't get over it. You know what I mean? Like it's not
Yeah.
that's, yeah, I don't know how to say it in a different way, but like
Yeah.
it is helpful to share
It's, cathartic. It does, I think if my grandmother had felt like she could share it, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, and it's good that your dad, opened up. For me, growing up, so for one thing, we lived in Chicago. The rest of our family was Montreal, a few in Toronto. And we had no family stories. I only had one first cousin who was only born when I was 16. I had one grandparent who my grandmother lived in Barbados after my grandfather retired. They ran a resort, and he when he died, she kept running it. We had like no family stories, no names, no places, nothing. Didn't understand religion, did not know the Bible. So of course, being in English without knowing biblical references, I was at a very big disadvantage, and this added to my level of feeling not good enough because of my ignorance. And so there's a real I think I worry, like, in especially today with the way the culture and is going, that there isn't going to be that sense of feeling like you're part of something bigger, with people moving away from religion and moving away from all of these kinds of things. I needed it. It really would have like been hugely helpful in my life, growing up, because growing up without any sense of identity is very negative. I mean, I got involved in, when we moved back to Canada for grade 9, which was horrible. And I got involved in drugs and other things because I was mourning my grandmother because she had just died.
Yeah.
And also, I was at this new school, knew nobody, and I had no idea of Canadian geography, history. I had a different measurement system. I spelled differently.
Yes,
I
yeah.
was like completely, and I didn't have anywhere to go for that sense of community.
Yeah.
And I really think I really would have benefited from that. And so I really feel like stories, like I feel a great loss in our family that we don't have any stories or legends or anything.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
So,
Incredible. So just thinking about taking all of that research
mhm.
and knowledge and discovery about your family, and then
Yeah.
and deciding to write about it, and you chose with the young adult novels to go for fiction,
Hmm.
and create characters and sort of like draw on family stories, but also create new ones. Was there a conscious decision to say I'm going to write fiction, or did you ever play with the idea that I want to write um, the collected and
The
nonfiction?
nonfiction, yeah. I mean, I did play with it. But I felt more comfortable. I didn't think I could, that the level of, as a journalist, I'm very well of the scrutiny that's needed for the nonfiction. And but what my historical fiction is, I think what separates it from others is the accuracy, like, not like I'm not criticizing that. It's the sense that all of my historical events are true. I don't make up plot lines in that sense at all. I use actual characters' names in all of my books. So like the first review for Rachel's Secret was like, so important for its historical accuracy. And I have gotten those reviews, up to the Night Sparrow, like, incredibly well researched, historically accurate novel. And so, I've even had people say, like, yours is like kind of on that cusp of nonfiction. But again, I don't want that scrutiny. And I like the idea of, I think it's more accessible as fiction. But I'm great pains to make sure that the characters are well drawn. Like, for example, the Night Sparrow, my recent one, I had translated diaries from the actual female snipers to work with. So I had their words. I could get into their heads and get a sense, and it was incredible. As well, I was able to talk to the daughter of one of the female snipers who now lives in Israel, and I blogged about that on my website. Um, for and like for Daughters of the Occupation, I included very many main characters, and the character of Miriam, the main one of the protagonists, is very much based on my Aunt Nusha. But I included the real Jews, the names that were involved, and one woman, Zelma, she was taken by this commando of collaborators and brought to the basement and raped repeatedly by these commanders, and she vowed to survive to tell people, and she did. She spoke. There's a huge YouTube of her being interviewed. And anyway, I wrote about her and I used her real name, and someone knows her daughter who also lives in Israel, and her daughter read it and contacted me through Facebook. and said, "Your depiction of my mother is beautiful. I really love it." And to me, that was one of the best things. I try really hard when I'm using real names to ensure that. And I had a lot again to work with Zelma, like she had talked, been interviewed, and all of that. I watched it carefully and I was trying to depict her because I don't want her forgotten. She is a hero. What she went through and survived, she is a hero. And so this is why I have a lot of real names and all of the events are true. And I actually had to fight with the publisher for In Rachel's Secret to keep the way that they actually survived in the book because she said this is a bit too horrific. And I said, no, it's how they survived. And I want it in there. Like I'm not sugarcoating it and I don't sugarcoat. And and I'm like I feel like if I want to do these people, mostly the women I'm really focusing on, justice and to commemorate them with dignity is to be as authentic as possible. And so that is sort of how I go about writing my book. So you're not going to find like a ton of romance in my books. You're not going to like because that just wasn't happening. I mean the snipers were like literally wrote about it. We haven't bathed in weeks. We're crawling in mud all night long, like as if we really feel like having sex. Like they weren't, unless they were raped. They were, but many of them were raped by their commanders, but there was not any of that kind of romantic love going on. Like so so it is although it's different with the pilots I'm writing about in my book now, there was romance, but not sex. They were got to know each other because again, not the bathing, they weren't, eating, but there was this kind of intellectual romance going on. But I try to really remain true to the characters and the setting and where they were so that you get a depiction, a really real and raw and honest depiction of them and the history. So that to me is my goal in writing, and that's been, yeah, in all of my books.
Well, and that speaks to your training as a journalist too, right? That you
Yeah.
have all those research skills and being able to like dissect and
Mhm.
really look at all the different sources and bring it together. And
Yeah.
then so it makes so much sense that you would write historical fiction that is like truly based in history, because I know that, there's I love historical fiction and I read all kinds of it. But there's a range. Like there's the historical setting and like really fictionalized, and then there's the really, really accurate
Yeah.
historical stuff with lots of characters, or I should say people who are populating it, and then some characters. So like it's like when you read that, it's you're walking away with a piece of history. Like you really feel like you have an understanding of what those women went through.
Exactly. That's what I really am trying to do. And in the Night Sparrow, as I mentioned earlier, they were the first female snipers in history to ever, and there were 2,500 of them. And about 1,000 of them, 1,200 were, there was a central women's sniper training school set up in Moscow in 1941 to train the women. And all of these women knew how to shoot from the Komsomol, which was their youth group. So they all did know how to shoot rifles. But these were the first female snipers in history, and but we haven't heard about them because they were erased from history by Stalin's government at the end of the war. He wanted a lot of people don't realize that the Soviet Union lost 36 million people in World War II. 36 million. So Stalin wanted to repopulate the country. And so he wanted the women to go back to their main role, which was motherhood.
Right.
And so he did not want them reveling in what they had done. He did not want them being celebrated for what they'd done. He wanted them to forget what they had done and go back and have children. The irony is, many of these women couldn't have children because their bodies had been through so much. And many of them, like Shura Ehrenstein, who I blog about, was so mentally damaged, she couldn't even look after the child she had. And she was spent a lot of time in mental hospitals as well. So there's kind of an irony there. But yeah, I feel like these women, they need to be remembered. And I'm really glad that the book came out this year because it's the 80th anniversary of VE Day this year. And so that is really important to me to get these women's stories across. And one of the resources I used was The Unwomanly Face of War by Svetlana Alexievich, and she won a Pulitzer Prize for this book. And it is the oral testimonies of women in the Soviet Union and Russia who fought. And it's their actual voices, like she records them. and writes them true verbatim, and you just get this sense of who they are. And she had many snipers she interviewed, so that was a fabulous resource. And she makes the point, we've all of the things we've read about combat to date are from a man's point of view. We have not read about a female's point of view. And a female's point of view, as I saw from the diaries, is so different, different textures, different things. So I read the diaries of male snipers and I read female snipers. And the female snipers would talk, they were young and they were on the cusp of womanhood, like they were as young as 18. And so they would write, like one, Rosa Shanina, who inspired one of the snipers in my novel. She was a real daredevil, like an adrenaline junkie, wanted to kill like fascists, but she also had crushes on all these boys. And she writes in, one of her entries, like I had it out with Nikolai, about my, there's like a girl in the medical battalion who's, likes him too, and I had it out with him with bullets all around us, and then another day she writes about the mean girls, like, oh, the girls are not very nice here. I'm having trouble making friends. And you realize the youth that they have been put in. And so this is what I'm talking about in terms of the female point of view compared to the male point of view.
Sure.
And we are finally getting that. And the only country that allowed females in combat was Russia, the Soviet Union in World War II. So hence I write about it. Now, this is a problem in Canada because I know there's a lot of, Canada right now. And so I have kind of, been out on a little bit of an outsider there, but I feel these women were important to Canada too, because without Russia, we wouldn't have got Hitler. And I mean, they needed the US as well. Let's be real, but these women fought for them, and their average lifespan of a sniper was 2 weeks on the front line. So they only 500 survived. So these women's stories deserve to be told. They don't take place in Canada, but they are the first female snipers in history and kind of paved the way for others to come in to combat. And I feel really strongly about their stories getting told and getting out there. And we were on the same side then. Sadly, things have changed, but it doesn't mean these girls should be forgotten.
No, and I think, I mean, I guess there is kind of a trend right now, and with Canadian stories, but I have always felt that what I loved about Canlit is we write stories that are about all people from all over the world because that's who we are as a country.
Hmm.
And so I've always loved that about Canlit is you can read a Canadian author who's writing about something that happened in Africa or in Europe
Yeah.
or wherever. And it's so powerful. And I totally agree with you that it's the women's stories that are now emerging.
Yeah.
Um, from different, like I loved reading about the resistance, the women in the resistance in France, and of
Oh, yeah.
course, I write about Finnish Latvian, and
Mhm.
every country has sort of. I'm so interested in what the women were doing, but this is so fascinating because they were in battle, like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
which is often the women are like a support role of some
Mhm.
sort,
Yeah.
and equally it, you know, can be traumatic and difficult and have all kinds of issues. But here, these snipers are in a role that you just don't expect at that time period, right? Like it's
No.
just,
They were put in, they wore men's uniforms, they had their hair cut short like a man's, and yet they were treated horribly, like by their own men, raped and all of this kind of thing. And then they were treated horribly when they returned by the women who hadn't gone to war because they were called sluts and whores and all these nasty things when they returned. So they really had a really rough time, but they fought. The reason their lifespan was so short was they had to crawl over like at night, they crawled over the front line, over no man's land into enemy territory because they were tasked with taking out the brains, the people making decisions. So they had to, the intelligence would tell them where they would be, and they would knew where headquarters was, and they would, wait for, like a thing like a cigarette lighter or something. They would, the flash of the moon on the metals, they camouflaged themselves beautifully. They were masters of camouflage. But they were taking a massive chance because they were on in enemy territory at the like, so that's why it was so risky. But one of my favorite stories is actually true, and it's in the book. There was like my platoon, they're all female, and there were a number of all female platoons. The leader was a female, and her name was Nina Lobovskaya, and she is by name in the book. And she looks like she's 16 years old. She's got like apple cheeks and blonde, and it's just really remarkable. And they were tasked with defending a road from the Germans one night. And the Germans was a unit. They were much bigger, many more of them. And the snipers camouflaged themselves using trees and that, and came out when they had good shots and shot and took down the Germans. And the Germans surrendered eventually after losing many men. Not one sniper was killed. The Germans then saw that they had been taken down by a female regiment and were horrified. Can you imagine? They were horrified. They, had terms like hermaphrodite and, witches, like horrible things were said about them. They could not believe they'd been taken down by a group of females, and that is all true. Yeah, like, and it's just amazing. And what I would love to see is these stories in history textbooks
Mm-hmm.
of World War II. Because as a woman, when you think about it, we grew up reading history and it was all the men. It was
Right.
all the men, and there were great books written and all that, but the textbooks, all men. Meanwhile, there were all these women doing things, and we were all on the same side, as I said. I would love to see these put back into the historical narrative where they belong, so that young girls in high school could read about these women and be inspired by them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
Actually, when you were mentioning that they were 18, I thought, goodness, that's like some of my high school students, 17, 18-year-olds. They're, these really young adults who are
yeah,
still in some ways children, and
yeah,
sometimes they're more adults and sometimes they're still kids. And to
yeah.
to imagine those girls being put in
No.
those situations, like unbelievable.
Well, you can actually see photos of them, and I blog about them, about the real women, and have their photos on my website. So you can actually see some photos and I have a gallery of photos of them on the website. I wanted them in the book, and they did not put them in the book, so
Right.
very frustrating. But anyway, on my website, I do have all of that. So you can see for yourself how young they looked, because when I go and speak and use the photos, people are shocked when they see these women. They're so young.
Incredible. I
It
just,
is. Although there was one woman I should talk about, and I blog about her too, who was 48 years old when the war began. She
oh,
had been a sniper and she enlisted. She was a grandmother. So the only grandmother sniper. So I blog about her on my website, and she was incredible. Not only was she working as a sniper on the front, but she was training other young people, men and women, to become snipers. She was a wonderful person by all accounts, and had been in a couple of other wars and didn't hesitate to. And the sad thing about her was she survived the entire war and then was in a car accident.
oh
Yeah,
no.
in 1945.
Imagine.
I know. And she had a granddaughter, and it just, it was so sad.
Yeah.
But there you the first that's probably the first only grandmother sniper in history, I would think.
Probably. I
Yeah.
would bet some money on that one.
Yeah.
Can you tell us at all about what your current project is, or is that like under wraps for now?
Yeah, no, I've been commissioned by HarperCollins to write another book. And it's another female book, and of course they are Soviet women, because only women, and it's a group, and again a full regiment of female. They were an air in the Air Force, and they flew. They were actually called the Night Witches, and I know that Kate Quinn did a book that kind of has a bit about them, but
Yeah.
mine is quite different. Anyway, and so they were a full regiment. This is about the entire regiment. What was so fascinating about them was they had to fly. They got the worst planes. They flew an open cockpit biplane made of canvas and plywood that top speed was 94 miles an hour. So what they did, their commander, who had taught men how to fly for 9 years, Kia Bershenskaya, she decided, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to, they're at night only because they would be killed. Like, they had no defense in the daytime. So they went at night and they flew at the highest altitude over the target, idled the engine, dropped down, and then released the bombs they were beneath the bottom wing. When the bombs release didn't work properly, the navigator had to climb out onto the wing and manually release the bombs. In the winter, it didn't matter. Like, and this happened quite a bit. And then they would go up to escape anti-aircraft fire. They would go up as soon as the bombs were dropped. They would go up, try to up to the altitude, you know. But the once as the Germans became more understanding of this, they had to, you know, the commander revised the strategy and had a decoy strategy that she devised to protect these planes coming in. And I mean, it was fabulous leadership, and it was they were a incredible group of women who also really tried to maintain their femininity, which they could more than the snipers because they weren't covered in mud, and totally different group of women and unbelievable women, and they were involved in the entire war, and so I'm writing about them, and that'll
Oh,
be out 2027. Yeah,
amazing. I'm so excited for that. So
yeah,
good. I just, it's just incredible, these stories, and
yeah.
find out about like how
Oh,
powerful these women are and how what roles they played. It's
oh.
always like just fascinating to me.
It really is. And I think what's really, I mean, I'm drawn to the Soviet Union myself. I actually had an aunt in Leningrad during World War II. I haven't been able to find her fate, but most likely she died in the siege of Leningrad, Tatiana. And but I am drawn to these stories because I had family there. And what I also find really, really fascinating as a journalist and as well is the way the propaganda kind of they how these women grew up with the propaganda, and I really get into that with the book that I'm doing, that with the Night Witches book. And in fact, one of my characters, actually Paulina Gelman, a Jewish woman, was named because she was a history major at university. She was given the role of political commissar, Politruk, so she had to be the one touting the propaganda. And you know, they did essays, they did debates, they did lectures, like they were extremely literal. They did philosophy debates, all of these kinds of things, which are fascinating. And but at the heart of it all was this idea of propaganda. And so that to me as a writer is just so fascinating, delving into that as well. Yeah.
So good, so fascinating. Okay, so I wanted you are going to be the
Yes.
writer at the writer's residency, and is it called Ventspils? I'm sure I'm saying
So yes, it's the Ventspils International Writers House, and there'll be nine of us there. I'm the only North American. And
amazing.
so they don't take a lot of North Americans. I think because it's a nonfiction I'm working on, and it takes, you know, it's with my Latvian Jewish roots and all of that. It's the on about the intersection of trauma and estrangement, which is rampant in my family, unfortunately. I was accepted, and so I'm very excited. We're there for a month. And we have our own room and bathroom, which is good. But
Yes.
we, you know, we eat together. We'll do some events. I'm actually going to be for 3 days at a Latvian Jewish writers symposium, speaking there about writing as well while I'm there. And so it's going to be a really great opportunity to connect with other writers, to learn from them, to you know, read their, like, we'll all do readings and things, and to have the ability to focus on writing and know everyday things going on, which will be fantastic. I will be writing about it, probably posting some few very short videos too as well on my social media feed. I can't include any of the other people for privacy, obviously, but we're in an old, like it's a centuries old place, you know, because it's very old there, but it's all been renovated in this little town, and Ventspils on the Baltic Sea, and I'm really excited about being able to really focus on my writing and have this time for me. Um, it's been it's going to be amazing. And I will say I got rejected from many before getting this one. It's very hard to get a fully paid writing residency. And so this was a lot of work to get, but I'm really, really happy. So yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for you. And
Thank
I'm so
you.
excited for the work that you're doing and the this Rooted in Silence. I think that is going to be incredibly powerful as well. And I hope that you'll come back when you have your next book out and we
Yeah.
can have a chat about it because I'm just love the work that you're doing and your focus on women. And I'm, you know, personally love those stories about wartime and European history and all of those things. And just um, that we talk about, again, the power, like Canadian literature is about all of us, right? It really is. As Canadian authors, we're writing about everyone and the world. And, having these powerful stories tells us so much about who we are and where we're from. And so it's really inspiring. And thank you so much for sharing all of these amazing stories with me. I'm going to be thinking about so much of this all day long because women are so fascinating.
And thank you too. I've been to Finland and loved it. And so I love that you are writing Finnish from like that, and that your father's story is like was completely unknown to me, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's again a story, we come from very many different places. And like you say, what you're doing as well. And I love that you're doing this podcast. I know it's a lot of work, and I so appreciate that because you're celebrating other writers, that sisterhood women, because I have encountered some not so nice, other women writers. So I absolutely really so appreciate you lifting up other writers.
That's so kind. I just love it so much that folks want to come and share and talk about their work. And I'm a real believer in, like, writing is not a competitive sport. We're here to support one another and learn from one another. And all of these stories, like, I'm so excited about your stories. Like, I can't, like, I got little chills when I hear great stories. So, and I'd love to share it with everybody else, because then they can encounter new authors, perhaps, or people, books that they haven't maybe come across yet. And I think, it's like folks like you who come and tell us about these stories that make us so excited to go and find them. So thank you so much. It's delightful.
You too. Thank you. Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Have a great rest of your day, and hopefully your writing is going well as well. And
keep working at it.
I know it's every day, it's a day, and it is a discipline. It really is.
Right. It really, really is.
Yeah. So I hear you. I get
it. Sure. Thanks, Jill.
Thank you so much, Liisa.
You're welcome. Do you have writing goals that you want to achieve in 2025? If you need support, encouragement, accountability, and community, join the Women Writing Circle. We meet bi-weekly to set writing goals and get pages done. Go to Women Writing on Substack and subscribe. Let's create a little magic this year. Thanks for taking time out of your schedule to have a coffee break with us at Women Writing. Don't forget to subscribe to Women Writing on Substack. If you like this episode, share it with someone who needs a writing break and a little inspiration. Happy writing! Thank you to Michael Jensen for his original music and editing, and to Mia Jensen for the logo design.